Hello. We're talking today about going over the reasons about why the Trinity is not really a biblical doctrine. This first part, we'll be talking about the nature of God in the Old Testament. Now, the New Testament was not written to replace or supersede the Old Testament. The New Testament was written by people who were firmly grounded in the Old Testament. Christians today tend to read the New Testament through the lens of the Church's teachings, whereas the writers of the New Testament were writing from the perspective of someone raised on the Old Testament alone, namely the Jewish perspective. Therefore, it is essential for us to first establish what the Old Testament teaches about the nature of God, in order to understand where the New Testament writers were coming from. In this section, I'll be sticking to passages that are clearly talking about who or what God is. For the moment, this won't include passages such as Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man in our image," which don't actually have the nature of God as a theme. For example, this verse is telling about the origin and nature of man, that he was made in the image of God. I'll address verses like this later on when I examine the Trinitarian proof texts. First, it'll be useful to consider what theologians have to say about the Trinity in the Old Testament. Theologians today are in agreement that the Hebrew Bible does not contain a doctrine of the Trinity, even though it was customary in the past dogmatic tracts to cite texts like Genesis 1:26 as proof of plurality in God. And this is from the Encyclopedia of Religion, Volume 15, published in 1987. Now let's start with God's answer to Moses about who he is. This is Exodus chapter 3, verses 14 and 15 from the American Standard Version. And God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me to you. And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, Jehovah, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. The Hebrew word translated I am is Ehya, which means I am what I will be. That's what it really means. The I am is kind of not the most precise translation. The Hebrew word translated as Jehovah is Yahweh, which means something like to be or the Eternal One. So God is known as the one who is. He is the Eternal One. Now, at the end of Moses' life, he made a famous declaration about who God is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. In Moses' speech, he makes it very clear that there is one God. The prophet Isaiah expressed it very beautifully in Isaiah chapter 45, verses 18 through 22. This is from the English Standard Version. For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it, he did not create it empty, and he formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I do not speak in secret in a land of darkness. I do not say to the offspring of Jacob, Seek me in vain. I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right. Assemble yourselves and come. Draw near together, you survivors of the nations. They have no knowledge who carry about their wooden idols, and keep on praying to God who cannot save. Declare and present your case. Let them take counsel together. Who told this long ago? Who declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord? And there is no other God besides me, a righteous God and Savior. There is none beside me. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is no other. Now, Christians will of course agree that there is one God, but they redefine the meaning of the word to mean a plurality of persons. However, the Old Testament is very consistent in insisting that there's only one God and there's no other besides him. Trinitarians will point out that God teaches us a little at a time, and that we can't handle everything at once. They say that Jesus didn't go around saying, I am God, because it would have been too dangerous. We'll discuss the times the Jews tried to stone Jesus later to see if he was actually implying that he was God. The problem with this argument is that the Old Testament specifically says that there is one God and no other beside him. Nowhere in Moses' or any of the other prophets' declarations about God do we see him explaining that this one God is a plurality of persons. In other words, it was God who through his messengers created this situation where it would have been dangerous for Jesus to say, I am God. Therefore, anyone who would reject Jesus for saying, I am God, would have been doing so because of what God said to Moses and the prophets. Why would God set up a situation where those who strictly adhered to the prophets' teachings would find it difficult to accept Jesus as God? Why wouldn't God have mentioned somewhere that this one God was in three persons, which would have made it easy for those who obeyed these teachings of the prophets to accept Jesus as God? Nowhere in any of the Old Testament do we find God mentioning that he is a three-in-one deity. Nowhere in the Old Testament do we find anything even remotely close to that. It is always, there is one God and no other besides him. This is the foundation of the Old Testament. This is foundation of the prophets. This is foundation of all of the teachings of Jesus. This is foundation on which the New Testament writers were coming from. This is the perspective they were writing from. So we must get rid of our preconceptions when we read the New Testament. Instead, we would want to approach the New Testament with the preconceptions that the writers would have. I hate saying preconception, but with the perspective that the writers of the New Testament had, which is an Old Testament perspective, which consistently said there is God is one, there is one God, there's no other besides him. And nowhere does it say that this God is a three-in-one being. It's just simply not said in any of those declarations. The clearest, most precise declarations about God in the Old Testament are always, God is one, and there is no other besides him. Now we need to look at what the Old Testament says about God's form. What did the Israelites see when God revealed himself to them? Reading in Exodus chapter 24, verses 9 through 12. Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in its clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also they saw God, and did eat and drink. And the Lord said unto Moses, Come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone, and a law, and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. Moses wanted to see God to understand him better. God said that Moses could not see his face and live, but God would reveal his back to Moses. But you don't get a descriptional form. This is very important. Moses doesn't say God looked like this or God looked like that. Instead, we get a description of God's character. This is starting off in Exodus chapter 33, verses 18. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim in the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom, and I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And he said, Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. And the Lord said, Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock, and it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I'll put thee in a cleft of the rock, and I'll cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I'll take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. And continuing in Exodus chapter 34, and going on to verse 7. And the Lord said unto Moses, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai, and present thyself there to me in the top of the mount. And no man shall come up with thee, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the flocks nor herds feed before the mount. And he hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and Moses rose up early in the morning, and went up into Mount Sinai, as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tables of stone. And the Lord descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him, and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that there will by no means clear the guilty. visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon their children's children, and the third and fourth generation. And continuing on with this theme, Moses commented on what the people actually see when they encounter God in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 10 through 19. Specifically in the day that thou stoodst before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days, and they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children. And he came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire in the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spake to you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the words of the Lord, but saw no similitude. You did not see anything, only ye heard a voice. And he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves. Pay very close attention. In other words, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Pay very close attention. You did not see anything when God spoke to you. And continuing, lest ye corrupt yourselves, and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. At least thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them, and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all the nations under the whole heaven. One of the big arguments for the Trinity is that in the incarnation, making God into man in the form of Jesus, that God allowed us to see him and to understand him better. But one of the themes that the Old Testament emphasizes, emphatically states, in no uncertain terms, Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you out of Horeb in the midst of the fire. Moses emphasized in the strongest possible words, pay close attention. You did not see anything when God spoke to you. God cannot be seen. For a Trinitarian to say that the incarnation allowed us to experience God by seeing him in the form of Jesus is an absolute direct contradiction to one of the most foundational beliefs of the Torah. This is part of the very foundation, one of the cornerstones of what the Old Testament teaches about God. First, that God is one, and there is no other besides him. And second, that you cannot see God. These are basic beliefs. And to say that God is a plurality of persons completely violates the first foundation stone. And to say that Jesus is God in the flesh, allowing us to see him, allowing us to see God, completely violates this other foundation stone of what the Old Testament teaches about God. One of the great truths of the Old Testament is God had no physical form. Would someone who had only had the Old Testament, like the Jews of Jesus' time, accept the idea of someone being God in the flesh? This makes it clear that when people encounter God, they saw no physical form. The Bible speaks about God's body metaphorically, but he does not have a body like us. One of the concepts surrounding the incarnation is that God had to take on the form of a man so that we could understand God more. However, Moses heavily emphasized the fact that the Israelites saw no physical form. For Moses, it was vital for the people to understand that God has no physical form. The reason he gave was to make sure that they would never create a statue of him. How does this relate to the doctrine of the incarnation? How does this reflect on the Christian practice of creating statues of Jesus and saying that he's God? and is saying that we had to see Jesus in order to understand God. This completely violates the most basic principles of the Old Testament, of what the Old Testament teaches about God. This is not something that's assumed out of the Old Testament. This is what Moses emphatically stated in the most clearest, strongest possible terms. God is one. There is no other besides him. God cannot be seen. You do not see anything when you encounter God. Least you end up worshiping something that can be seen. Least you end up worshiping this man, Jesus. Now, I do need to be honest and mention Ezekiel's vision of the throne of God. Ezekiel does initially use the word man when describing the appearance of a figure on the throne. However, when he goes on into more detail, he describes the figures having the appearance of fire. This lines up with Moses' description of God speaking out of the fire. Because of this, I believe that he was not saying that God actually looked like a man, but was just trying to find words to describe the indescribable. And you can judge this for yourself. This is in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, and as the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of a throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. And I saw as the color of amber, and the appearance of the fire round about it, from the midst of his loins even upwards, and from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire. It's not describing human features, is describing the appearance of fire, both above and below. And it had the brightness round about. And as the appearance of the bow that is on the cloud in the day of the rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spoke. Now, related to this is God's form. Related to God's form is whether or not he is a man. There are three texts that are important here. The first is Numbers 23, verses 19. This is out of the English Standard Version. God is not a man, that he should lie, or a son of man, that he should change his mind. Has he said, and he will not do it? Or has he spoken, and he will not fulfill it? Second is 1 Samuel 15:29, out of the English Standard Version. And also, the glory of Israel will not lie or have a regret, for he is not a man, that he should have regret. And the third is Hosea chapter 11, verse 9. I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee, and I will not enter into the city. So we've examined three themes that are clearly stated. Very, very clear, definite statements, not ambiguous, not could be interpreted one way or can interpret it another. These are very clear statements. One, that God is one, and then there's no other beside him. The God cannot be seen, is not a visible God as a physical form. And third, fourth, God is not a man or the Son of Man. And in the New Testament, we have a man who calls himself the Son of Man named Jesus, who New Trinitarians say is part of a three beings who are God, and is God in the flesh so that we can see him. You see how every part of the Trinitarian doctrine violates clear statements in the Old Testament. The Old Testament clearly states that God is not a man or a son of man. Now let's continue. However, this doesn't necessarily preclude the possibility of God changing into man. So we have to see if that's possible or not. Is that something that a reader of the Old Testament would consider? We read in Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Here we have a statement that God does not change. This would seem to indicate that he would not change and become a man. But we do have to take into account things like God's visit to Abraham in Genesis 18. But how do we take this into consideration? Now this is a difficult passage which has caused a lot of discussion and controversy. Since we are discussing God in the Old Testament, right now I'll present the standard Jewish interpretation, or at least a standard Jewish interpretation. It is quite different from the way Christians interpret it, not only theologically, but in how they actually read the narrative. The Jewish interpretation is based on the fact that the subject of this chapter is hospitality, and there are no direct statements of who or what God is. Therefore, it should be interpreted in light of the clear statements about God, such as the ones above that say God has no physical form. The passage that makes a clear statement about God, such as Deuteronomy chapter 4, should determine how we interpret the passage that makes no such clear statements, which is Genesis chapter 18. This is a basic thing of exegesis that people often fail to really appreciate, that when you have clear statements, these are the ones that need to show you how to interpret ambiguous passages. Or clear statements are talking about a specific topic, specifically here, the nature of God, inform you on how to interpret passages that are not clearly talking about the nature of God. So even if Genesis chapter 18 taken by itself may appear to show God being a man, should we let that passage alter the way we interpret these clear passages about the nature of God? So, according to this interpretation, kind of the standard, or at least a standard Jewish interpretation, God was comforting Abraham in verse 1 as Abraham recovered from his circumcision. Then he looked up and saw 3 men. He stopped conversing with God and ran to meet the 3 men. According to the Jewish Talmud, these 3 were Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, an angel named in the Apocrypha. This means that the conversation should be interpreted something like this. And this is Genesis chapter 18, verses 9 through 23. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, and my Lord being old also? And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh? Saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And the way they interpret is this part, saying, The Lord said unto Abraham, is God speaking privately with Abraham, and that God is not one of those 3 men who had approached and was sitting down. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. And the rabbis interpret it, Genesis chapter 20, verse 12, where it says, And all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, to mean that she was a prophetess. So she heard what God said to Abraham, and he responded directly to her. And the men rose up from thence, and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. So you've got the men, you have Abraham, and then also here you have, And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I knew him that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, Behold, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now, and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it which is come unto me. If not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom. So the men, it doesn't say 2 of the men, just says the men, which would seem to imply that all 3 that had come left. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. So you have Abraham and the Lord, and then the men are separate. The Lord is not part of the men. even though that's the way Christians always interpret it. But and Abraham drew near and said, so after the men have left and gone toward Sodom, Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now the Talmud states that Michael's task was to inform Sarah of Isaac's birth, so he returned to heaven and did not accompany Gabriel and Raphael to Sodom, and that's why only 2 angels appear in Sodom. Now this does seem to be an apparent contradiction between Genesis 18, which seems to imply that God appeared to Abraham in physical form, and Deuteronomy chapter 4, which emphatically states that God has no physical form. I'm not entirely convinced that the above interpretation of Genesis 18 is the correct one, but I'm sure that the method at arriving at that interpretation is better than that used by most Christians. The question is, should this story, which does not make any direct statements about the nature of God, alter our interpretation of Deuteronomy 4, which emphasizes that God has no physical form? Or should the clear statements about the nature of God tell us how to interpret Genesis 18, which is essentially a story about hospitality, and which is a better exegesis? It's always a difficult word. So we have in the Old Testament the nature of God, that the Lord is one and there's no other beside him, and this is emphatically stated by Moses in clearest possible terms. And also in the clearest possible, most emphatic terms possible, Moses states, God has no physical form, you do not see him. And also the Old Testament clearly states, God is not a man, and God is not a son of man. So the very idea of the Incarnation violates, and especially the Incarnation and the Trinity, both violate the clear statements in the Old Testament about the nature of God. Let's go on to the next section.